Hi, welcome to Groundwork. This is a podcast from McClanahan to talk about key material processing topics, from agriculture to mining to materials recycling. We'll discuss the best ways to process the raw materials that power the world, because if it's not grown, it's mined. My name is Hillyer. I'm the Director of Global Sales for Mining at McClanahan. I've been in the industry for about 27 years. My background has been in crushing, sizing, in-pit crushing convey projects all over the world, mainly in Australia, but everything from coal to iron ore, bauxite, nickel, gold. And I'm joined today by Peter Bone.
Hi, I'm Peter Bone. I'm based on the East Coast with McClanahan in our Newcastle office. I'm a mechanical engineer. I have over 20 years of mining and materials handling experience through various private companies and multinationals as well. I've been with McClanahan for over 6 years. I came here with projects. I was in the projects department for about 4 years, and about 2 years ago I moved into sales in dry and wet process equipment.
Good stuff. Thanks, Pete. Today we're going to be talking about apron feeders, drag chain feeders, and wobbler feeders, and why those feeders are critical in the materials handling systems in mining. So first we're going to talk about apron feeders. Basically, what is an apron feeder and everything about apron feeders. So essentially, an apron feeder is just a mechanical conveyor. You have pans that typically overlap two strains of chain, and apron feeders are typically used in run of mine applications when you're tipping large rocks, high capacity large rocks, either installed on an incline or horizontal. But also apron feeders are used under reclaims, under stockpiles as well. Quite typically in iron ore, apron feeders are used in that way. So really heavy duty, solid piece of kit, and I would say typically one of the only ways of conveying run of mine front end material at a high capacity rate. The basic designs of an apron feeder, so you've typically either got a hydraulic or electromechanical drive, tail shaft with sprockets, drive shaft, sprockets, and essentially it's a big lump of steel that's moving big rocks, usually into a primary crusher. So it could be anything from sizer, jaw crusher, gyratory crusher, anything really on the front end. In my opinion, apron feeders are good for most materials. Seen them installed on anything from iron ore, copper ore, gold, coal, bauxite, nickel, absolutely everything. You can use an apron feeder to feed a primary crusher on pretty much every material that mining can throw at it.
I think it's important to understand that apron feeder gives you good metered feed into whatever it's feeding into, whether that be a gyro, a cone, or a mineral sizer. They're certainly good with a high impact situation and a high abrasive materials, and also good in a hopper arrangement under a rear dump at the ROM, just shearing that material out.
Yeah, definitely. I think apron feeders come in when the material is really hard, really abrasive. You've got really large material. You're dumping large material onto that deck. I think that's where they really they come into their own, because there's not really, unless you're digging the excavator right at the front and you're dumping in a truck and you're trucking it. I guess you still got to use a feeder, but it's the only real piece of equipment that can feed that primary blasted material into a crusher. I think one thing for me is the fact that you do get a lot of you typically need a dribble conveyor, or you need to bring the conveyor back under the feeder, because you will get that fines seepage through an apron feeder. Whereas, obviously, we talk about other feeders, you don't get that. What do you reckon? What else?
Yeah, look, I think capex side, it's certainly more expensive than a belt feeder, but opex wise, you put a belt feeder in that same situation, the belt's just going to wear, and your opex costs are going to be higher. Like you mentioned, with if the material has a lot of fines, it can certainly cause issues with an apron feeder, which is where you might consider a belt feeder or a low profile belt feeder instead.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is, if an application stops and you run the material and you've got a full load hopper and everything stopped, because they're incredibly high torque, you can pull out of a full load hopper, and obviously feeders are designed, worst case scenario, that hopper is full and it's got the required pull out torque to recover itself. I suppose that you look at a lot of the other feeders, yeah, you can do that with a drag chain, up to a certain bulk density. But when you're talking like bulk density of copper, gold, iron ore, if you've got a 400 cube hopper, 400 meter cube hopper, your densities, bulk density is 2 tons per meter cube. That's an 800-ton hopper that you've got to pull out of. So it's really the only machine that you can use for sort of a high capacity, high density material, I would say.
Yeah, it gives you that high capacity, as you said, which is some of the other options wouldn't. A belt feeder wouldn't be able to give you that same throughput.
No, that's it. But as you made a good point. The capex is typically higher on an apron feeder. I guess there's sort of a not a limitation on width, but I guess there is. And also your running gear, depending, whether it's a D4, D7, D9, D10, D11. Obviously, as you go up in that range, your price it increases quite significantly. But I guess you've got some experience, Pete, with apron feeders feeding into wobbler feeders. Obviously, you've got quite a bit of experience at McClanahan with wobblers, and I get that's a nice segue onto talking about wobbler feeders. Yeah, tell us about wobblers.
Yeah, look, we've got an install base of wobblers in Australia in vastly different materials. I'd say in both a wet and dry process. Both are fed by an apron feeder. The front end is fed via a front end loader or a dozer push arrangement in pit. The apron feeder gives that metered feed onto the wobbler feeder. The wobbler feeder is basically a bunch of elliptical bars that are offset 90 degrees that will scalp the fines out of that material before the material or the oversized passes over into the wobbler. So I suppose the wobbler is great in these applications. The material's quite sticky.
And I guess touching on that, Pete, like when you talk about wet, sticky material, it's a problem in the industry, right? It's a problem for crushers, it's a problem for chutes, it's a problem for feeders, right? So even you're looking at an apron feeder, and we talk about it being a great piece of equipment, but if it's really sticky, crappy material, like the wobbler feeder is a really good machine for like feeding that sticky material, but also like passing it through, so bypassing the crusher, passing it through, so it's not you're not going into a jaw and creating those pancakes, or you haven't got that real sticky high silica stuff, which is like a grinding paste that can go into a sizer and cause excessive wear. So wobblers are kind of great for just almost taking that material out, but also feeding the oversize as well.
Yeah, and I think applications with traditional screening or grizzlies just aren't able to handle that sticky material or material with high clays just bridges together, and as it passes over a traditional vibrating screen, it just forms an agglomerated lump, or we've heard one of our customers refer to it as a snake, and it just follows along the screen. and just passes straight off the end of the screen. So the wobbler certainly does a much better job agitating the material as it passes over, and actually scalping those fines out.
It's interesting because it's a machine that's been around for quite some time. I mean, I remember a few projects going back sort of like 15 years and sort of earlier in my career, like, like 20 odd years ago, where wobblers were like really popular and then they went out of fashion. And it's kind of that happens in the mining industry, right? With a few different products. But when you really look at the application, and look at the machine and what it can do, it's actually a fantastic piece of equipment. The fact that there's not that many pieces of equipment. We talk about sizes, how they can process sticky clay, difficult material, but a wobbler's right up there, right? It's a machine that definitely helps with that wet, sticky, difficult, problematic material. As you said, screens, material snaking over and customers losing product. Where a wobbler, and that customer has ramped up their throughput massively by taking out a screen and putting a wobbler in.
Absolutely. I mean, you've gone from a situation where you've got multiple ROMs operating down to a simple ROM. Your OPEX cost drops significantly. Your work, you've got one dozer running instead of three dozers running. So that's a huge benefit for them.
Absolutely. Obviously, if we talk about, I guess, there's lots of pros for the wobbler, but I guess some cons. They don't like typically direct tipping. Wobblers. You can't take a 200-ton truck and dump a whole load of material on a wobbler. I think there's an option there to maybe look at a design improvement in the future, but currently there's no wobblers on the market where you can do that.
Yeah, look, like you said, they need something to feed it. Once, like a screen, if you just dump onto if you have a 4 meter redump tray dumping onto a 4 meter, 8 meter screen, you lose 4 meters of that effective screening. I'd say they are a bespoke machine, and you really need to deal with someone who knows what they're talking about to size it for that application. You've got to get it right. And it's got to be fit for that application and that material. Whether it's a bauxite, a phosphate, a mineral sands, a limestone, whatever it is, you need to get it right, and you need to kind of talk to someone. You can't just pick one out of a brochure and go, "We'll use that one." It doesn't work that way.
No. Well, that's interesting because I think McLaren, we're the only one of the companies in the world that's still doing wobbler feeders, right? And actually making those design improvements and making it fashionable. It's a bit like actually very similar with the sort of vibrating grizzly scalping feeder. They were also a machine that went, sort of out of fashion, and they're right back into fashion now. So it's quite an interesting thing in the mine industry how things like that piece of equipment, it's a bit like trends in houses and stuff like that, like home decor and mine equipment can go out of fashion as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of those ore bodies now, they're mining the good stuff. The yields are lower. They're looking for solutions to be able to manage this ROM material, because if they can't get the material through the ROM, it doesn't get to the plant, and it can be the difference between a project being a success or a failure, as we've actually seen over here in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen quite a few jaw crusher applications where jaw crushers selected to process the hard material, but it's not even considered about how wet and sticky it is, especially in Southeast Asia. A lot of the nickel deposits, bauxite deposits, where you've got a feeder going into a jaw, and you're not taking out that clay before, and it just clogs up and it blocks the throughput. So yeah, it's definitely paired with the right crusher or sizer, and feeding it right. It's a pivotal piece of equipment for wet process. For wet sticky material.
I mean, the only other considerations with a wobbler feeder, you you can have the option of a combination pitch. The bars are naturally self-cleaning, but there's several configurations that you can look at to help those bars self-clean, just to keep the screening efficiency high. And also, some of our options, you can actually change the pitch of the bars, or change the configuration if need be, during operation, just to maximise the efficiency.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the other thing is it's flat as well. It's horizontal. There's not many pieces of equipment that are totally flat, or feeders that are totally flat, right? So from a height perspective, you maintain that level. You've got one deck, but you're also keeping your height of your plant down as well. Which is really important. When you're obviously designing a plant, the higher it is, the more steel it is, the more costly it is. So with wobblers being completely flat, then they're also good to help keep down the height.
Yeah, especially if you're going from an apron feeder to a screen or a wobbler to a sizer, you end up with something that could potentially be 4 stories high. Especially a lot of solutions are in pit these days, so it's a big bit of kit to be moving around.
Yeah. I guess the other thing as well, like without having a love in on wobblers, you know, if you have a wobbler, and this is the same with any kind of screen, right? When you're selecting a sizer or a crusher, if you can bypass that undersized material, you can actually lower the size of the crusher required. So, you may think it's added an extra piece of equipment into a system, but if you can actually bypass all the fines, which is often very fines and sticky materials, very problematic. So if you can bypass that from the crusher and just let the crusher do its thing, which is essentially crushing big rocks into little rocks, you know, it you can save yourself capex. Yeah, you might be adding a piece of equipment in, but you could be saving yourself a huge amount of capex on the crusher by bypassing either the fines or the sticky material.
Yeah, capex and opex too. Removing those fines certainly reduces that abrasive wear on that bit of machinery.
Yeah, so Pete, I think it's always interesting when you're selecting. Part of my career was selecting feeders, and it's always interesting what information's needed when you're selecting a feeder, any feeder, right, from an apron feeder to a wobbler to a drag chain feeder. What information's needed in order to do that specification?
Yeah, absolutely. It's critical to getting the right solution in place, to be able to supply that data, or even supply a representative sample, for us to be able to put together those inputs to design the or select the correct machine.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think often you kind of get asked, oh, give us a price for an apron feeder or give us a price for a drag chain feeder. And it's not a case of you can say, okay, well, look, what's the size of your infeed? What's your capacity? How hard is it? How abrasive is it? What's the abrasion index? What's the bulk density? What does your hopper arrangement look like? Because obviously a hopper arrangement is huge in the design of a feeder. That's having an impact on what your chain size is, what your torque requirement is, what your power requirement is. So actually, you need a lot of information, and that's why it's great at McClanahan that we can send out those questionnaires with the little sketches. Like, just tell us everything everything that you can, so we can more accurately quote and spec what you need.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the big guys we work with, a lot of your big EPCs have that data initially, but a lot of those smaller end customers don't have that data. So we've got the questionnaire, but it really relies on us to really probe them for that information, even if it's in the early feasibility stages of the project, to give them what they need to be able to move forward.
And I suppose that's where I guess the experience of the company, being an 190-year-old company, and a few of us with a few grey hairs kind of know, right? And we can make a selection and we can make some assumptions. You never like to make too many assumptions, but I guess that's why it's good for customers to come to a supplier like McClanahan, we've got all those years of experience, all those installation references. So, if up the the front end, if the information is lacking a little bit, we can still make some good assumptions and be pretty sure that we've done quite a few different projects before that are similar. So we can specify the right equipment. Well, I guess the one feeder we haven't talked about yet is the drag chain feeder. Talk a bit about drag chains, Pete.
Yeah, look, McClanahan on the east coast over here in Australia has I suppose, a large number of drag chain feeders installed in coal applications. We have them in reclaim feeders for train loadout situations with the gooseneck. We have them installed in ROM applications. We have them installed with breaker heads as a feeder breaker. But ultimately, a very versatile piece of kit. And we've got, I suppose, quite a vast experience to lean on to support our customers in various material handling applications.
Yeah, and I think obviously, drag chains have been used typically in coal, um, but also in salt applications as well, and sort of the more softer friable applications. Um, but like you said, the variability of a drag chain feeder, the fact that you can gooseneck it, so you can start it on a horizontal and then incline it, that has a massive saving on site civils, or your concrete or your steel work. To be able to start out as a flat and incline, and that's something we didn't touch on the apron feeder. You can't do that. You've got apron feeder, you've got horizontal or incline, and that's it. Where I guess drag chains, you can start on that horizontal, get it. Some customers even obviously bury them in the ground, almost like in a bunker that's at ground level, and dozer push over the top or truck tip over the top of the back end. So it's incredibly low, cost effective piece of equipment. Yeah, and I guess touching on that, right, and like you said, you can either have it as a reclaim feeder, so just under a stockpile, or you can, if you put a breaker in, you can have it as a reclaim feeder breaker. So you can actually use it as in a ROM application as well.
Yeah, I'd say that's predominantly in coal. Um, a large percentage of our install base is in that ROM application, processing your ROM coal fed by a rear dump. Whether that's in your bypass or your main feed into the plant, and then that'll size down to then feed into our secondary and then tertiary sizer to achieve the product size the customer's after.
Well, yeah, I guess that's good, right? Because I know we're talking about feeders today, but if you stack up, and obviously we do apron feeders and we do sizers, but essentially you've got a feeder and a crusher in one. So it's a really cost-effective piece of equipment for the right application, which saying coal, ROM coal, um, even overburden and salt, and other applications as well. It's a really really cost-effective piece of equipment, and you know, traveling up into Southeast Asia and Indonesia, predominantly, reclaim drag chain, reclaim feeders, feeder breakers are kind of like the number one um, up there.
Yeah, I think we've proven the reliability uh, in the field. They're quite easy to maintain, and we've got quite a modular approach around our head shaft, tail shaft, our brake assembly arrangement to get in there and to be able to change out those rotables quite quickly.
Yeah, I think we've definitely at McClanahan, certainly over the past probably 30, 40 years, really refined the feeder breaker to be, and the drag chain feeder to be probably the best in class, I would say. We're biased, but I would, but I would definitely say it's best in class, and that's taking an impartial view over 25 years. But I suppose look, they do have the limitations. They're typically lighter, friable material. They don't like sticky. They really don't like sticky material. It's not good for the chain, and they don't like real hard abrasive material either. So you know, if you're looking at like I don't know, a bauxite with hard inclusions and real wet, sticky, or a gold oxide or a copper oxide, you don't want to be considering a drag chain feeder. That's when you're going to go apron feeder, right?
Yeah, that or the high fines too can also cause an issue with drag chain feeders and apron feeders. So that would be an application where we might choose another bit of kit rather than the drag chain.
But we have got some obviously really great applications, I guess, all over the world for drag chains. Really, whether it is just a drag chain feeder or whether it's a drag chain feeder breaker. Yeah, we've got some, and you've been involved in some big projects, Pete, as well. You've actually project managed some big projects, haven't you?
Yeah. I've probably project managed half a dozen, if not more, gooseneck reclaim feeder breakers, whether they're hydraulic or electronic or electric drive. Sorry, in New South Wales, in Queensland, in Indonesia. I believe we did our first or the first gooseneck feeder breaker over there as well, which obviously gives you that reduction of two machines into a single machine, both reclaiming and sizing at the same time onto a belt, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, actually, I saw in Indonesia last year one of our reclaim gooseneck drag chain feeders. Been working for 20 years, still working well, still ticking along. You know, and I wouldn't say the maintenance is that sort of regular and intensive, but that machine just keeps going. It keeps, and it's actually one of the highest capacity drag chain feeders in the whole of Indonesia. So, and that was the Sai guys was telling me that. I was like, wow. And this thing is just the heart of the plant. It just keeps going. It's feeding into a sizer, into a twin shaft sizer, and it's doing fantastic. So, but again, it shows, right? It's horses for courses. You pick the right machine for the right application, and it'll work, for many years trouble free. But you put the wrong machine, into the wrong application, and it'll just be a nightmare from a maintenance perspective and a production perspective. You're going to be constantly maintaining that machine. So I guess it's really important to come and talk to the experts, right? And really be open about the material, what it is, and really, get as much information up front so we can make an informed decision of what the best piece of equipment is for the customer. I suppose that's our advantage, right? As a McClanahan advantage is we're sort of agnostic to, because we do so many different products, we can say, hey, an apron feeder's right here, or no, apron feeder's wrong, you need to go wobbler feeder, or actually material's really friable, you can go drag chain feeder. We've got a client who's looking at a high capacity overburden. They were looking at apron feeders, and we were like, no, you should be considering a drag chain feeder because of X, Y, and Z. All the reasons we spoke today. So we've got those years of experience to say this is what, rather than just selling a piece of equipment. It's like, no, this is the right machine for the application, irrespective of whether a customer comes to us or not. Hopefully they do come to us, but you want to do the right thing.
And we draw on that installation experience, and we draw on other resources within the business as well pretty heavily to be able to help these guys out, and give them those correct selections from day one.
Absolutely. In fact, it was only the other day I saw a process sheet that had a horizontal feeder breaker at a transfer. So it was a 2,000 ton an hour application coming off of a conveyor, quite a fair, going at a good speed as well. This conveyor feeding into a horizontal feeder breaker, and it's like it's totally the wrong machine, in that application. So we kind of looked at it and said, no, actually, customer can actually save capex and put a sizer in that application, which obviously, size is good for to put them at transfers after conveyors because it's small, low profile, compact. Feed into the sizer, straight down, save the customer so much on height of the plant, steel work, and also, capex of the equipment, but also, the ongoing OPEX as well, because again, right machine for the right application. Not just trying to shoehorn any piece of equipment because perhaps another supplier only sells that one piece of equipment. And that's what I've kind of seen in the industry, that if there's a supplier that's only got one piece of equipment, they're just trying to sell that one piece of equipment, right? Regardless of whether it's right or not. And often that can give a piece of equipment a bad name in the industry. Not necessarily the wrong piece of equipment, right? A good piece of gear, but put it in the wrong application, and you know what the mining industry is like.
Yep, bitten once, twice shy.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
I think you mentioned on that the drag chain feeder in overburden historically. The other benefit we've got is we take a lot of customers to other sites, and we'll actually show them the machines working in very similar, if not the same, applications, and that's established from keeping good relationships with customers who have our equipment installed, and that really helps other customers, sometimes even their competitors, But it's to understand the equipment in that application and make good decisions.
Yeah, I think we're in the industry, right, to advise customers and help them. And even if they don't buy from us today or tomorrow or next year, if you give the right advice, it sounds a bit cliche, but I guess salespeople get a bad reputation. But I think we are, somebody said to me once that we're trusted advisors, and I don't like that word, but I think that's what we are in the industry. Like it's our obligation to advise customers of the right machine, give them the right advice, get the right machine. It's good to talk about mining equipment, and I think we all love crushing big rocks into little rocks. I think that's why we're all in the mining industry.
There's probably a whole lot of stuff we could talk about that we overlooked, but I think we hit the main points.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, at McClanahan, we do apron feeders. We do a wide range of apron feeders, wide range of drag chain feeders and wobbler feeders. We can take customers to see, hundreds of references around the world, different applications. So yeah, if anybody's listened to this in the market for an apron feeder, drag chain feeder, feeder breaker, wobbler, give us a shout. Me and Pete are more than happy, and the rest of the sales team are more than happy to help you out. To wrap things up, thank you for listening to Groundwork, McClanahan podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favourite listening app for new episodes, and follow McClanahan on social media for more content. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.